What if your daily coffee wasn't just a habit, but a global conspiracy centuries in the making? From revolutions to cults, black markets to brain chemistry manipulation, coffee's dark legacy is far more sinister than anyone admits. This isn't just a beverage, it's a weapon. And by the final chapter, you'll discover the most chilling reason of all, something buried so deep, it was almost erased from history. But before we dive in, let me know if you're enjoying this kind of long, gentle history. Feel free to tap that like button and subscribe, only if you truly love what I'm doing here. And in the comments, share where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your city. I always love seeing our little bedtime crew gathering from every corner of the world. Now lower your lights, maybe let a soft fan hum in the background, and settle in. Let's ease into tonight's quiet journey together. Chapter 1. The Drink That Sparked Revolutions. In the dim corners of 17th century Istanbul, men gathered under flickering lantern light. Not in mosques, not in courts, but in secret places where a new drink flowed like ink, black, bitter, and electric. This wasn't just a social hour. It was a threat. Coffee houses spread through the Islamic world like wildfire. At first glance, they looked harmless. Men chatting, cups clinking. But beneath that calm was something radical. These spaces were classrooms without teachers, parliaments without kings, newspapers before the printing press. Ideas passed from table to table faster than swords ever could. And the rulers noticed. When people stopped praying and started thinking, the empire trembled. In Mecca, authorities tried to crush the trend. In Cairo, the cafés were raided. They said it was about morality. But the real fear was something deeper. Coffee was making the people think, question, and most dangerously, talk. And history shows that once people start talking, no power is safe. The pattern repeated across continents. When coffee arrived in Europe, it brought the same storm. Paris, Vienna, London, cities that drank ale before noon suddenly craved something different. The coffee house became the pulsing brain of the city. Noisy, smoky, crowded, but alive. It was where philosophers scribbled notes between sips, where printers discussed forbidden pamphlets, and where commoners learned the language of rebellion. Monarchs looked down and saw something worse than riots. They saw revolution brewing in porcelain cups. In England, the king called coffee houses places of sedition. In France, the Bourbon monarchy couldn't stop their rise. These were not taverns for drunkards. They were schools for the dissatisfied. The Enlightenment didn't happen in silence. It happened over spilled espresso and political jokes whispered under the smell of roasted beans. Coffee was becoming more than a drink. It was a rallying cry, a bitter symbol of clarity. And in those moments of clarity, men began to dream of new worlds. The fear of rulers was not paranoia, it was historical pattern. In the Ottoman Empire, Sultan Murad IV waged a personal war against coffee. He outlawed it. He sent spies to sniff it out. He punished its drinkers with death. But why such cruelty for a cup of beans? Because those who drank it didn't just stay awake, they woke up. Coffee disrupted the natural order. It sharpened minds dulled by tradition. It made the laborer think like a philosopher. The student question the imam. The soldier doubt his orders. And when ideas cross class boundaries, power begins to slip. That was the true danger. Coffee leveled the field. In a society built on hierarchy, caffeine was an invisible weapon. One cup at a time, it shattered obedience. And the more they banned it, the more people wanted it. It became a badge of rebellion, a ritual of resistance. Coffee was no longer just a stimulant. It was sedition in liquid form. In the Age of Enlightenment, coffee houses became unofficial governments. They hosted political discussions that couldn't happen in public. In London's cafés, merchants debated colonial trade while poets criticized the monarchy. In Vienna, intellectuals plotted reform while sipping Turkish brews. These places had no guards, no permits, and no church bells, but they moved history, and rulers couldn't stop them. They tried taxing the beans. They tried shutting down the shops. But every attempt only fueled the flame. The more they pushed, the more people gathered. Even women, banned from many public forums, began to find their way into the culture, brewing coffee at home and hosting salons of their own. Knowledge wasn't just for the elite anymore. It was for anyone with access to boiling water and a quiet corner. And that terrified those in charge, because an informed public is a dangerous public. And coffee, more than any speech or sermon, was becoming the world's first true democratizer. The American colonies, too, felt the jolt of the bean. While tea had symbolized British order, coffee quickly became the drink of resistance. After the Boston Tea Party, patriots turned away from tea not just out of politics, but symbolism. Coffee was freedom in a mug. Its bitterness became a badge of rebellion. In taverns and meeting halls, revolutionaries plotted their uprising over strong black brews. It was in those spaces that talk of liberty, independence, and self-rule fermented. George Washington himself served coffee to his troops. But more than caffeine, it was clarity they craved. Coffee sharpened the mind in ways that encouraged risk. And revolution requires risk. Every bold word, every drafted constitution, every whispered conspiracy against a king, it all gained momentum over hot cups passed from hand to hand. The drink had shifted sides. It was no longer just a stimulant. It was a symbol, not of submission to empire, but defiance of it. Even in the Islamic world, where it first spread, coffee continued to carry dangerous ideas. Sufi mystics drank it to prolong their night prayers. Scholars sipped it to extend their studies. But eventually, the intellectual awakening it inspired challenged the very religious and political structures it once supported. Cairo's cafés became dens of philosophy. Istanbul's backstreets echoed with verses that questioned fate and power. And slowly the cracks widened. Authorities attempted purges. They raided the cafés. They accused owners of heresy. But the drink wouldn't die. It was portable, simple, and addictive in more ways than one. You couldn't outlaw thought, and that was the core of it. Coffee was more than beans and boiling water. It was fuel for a new consciousness, and once lit, that fire was impossible to smother. In every regime that tried to crush it, coffee resurfaced like a ghost, stronger, darker, and more deeply rooted in defiance. But not all revolutions were loud. Some brewed in silence. In the salons of Paris, aristocrats whispered about the failures of their king while sipping coffee from delicate china. In Berlin, professors questioned dogma between sips in university cafes. In Italy, unification plots were passed along under the scent of roasted beans. These weren't riots in the streets, they were storms in the mind. And that was more dangerous, because change didn't always come with gunpowder. Sometimes it came with clarity. Coffee gave people the mental stamina to think longer, argue sharper, and dream bigger. It slowed the decay of apathy, pushed people to connect ideas, to resist numbness, to demand better. Governments feared the riot, but they should have feared the reflection. The man sitting alone in a corner, sipping his brew, questioning everything. He was the true spark of revolution, not the sword-bearer, but the thinker. The irony is that most revolutions sparked by coffee were not about coffee at all. The drink was only the medium, but like ink to a pen, it was essential. Without it, many ideas would never have crystallized. Without it, debates would have faded into fatigue. Without it, courage may have collapsed under pressure. The Ottoman bans, the European crackdowns, the American rebellions, none were about beans, but all involved them, because coffee was the silent companion of resistance. It sat beside the pamphlet, the manifesto, the declaration. It was present in the late-night writings and the early morning marches. Every act of civil disobedience, every protest song, every underground movement, it all brewed in the same place. The minds of people kept awake by a dark, bitter friend. And though few speak of it today, history would look very different if the world had never tasted that first sip. Even the French Revolution bore the stains of coffee cups. Jacobins and radicals met in cafés, not churches. They rallied the disillusioned, dissected monarchy, and fanned the flames of revolt. Coffee gave their minds the stamina to keep going long into the night, turning conversation into conviction. When the Bastille fell, it wasn't just muskets and mobs that made it possible. It was years of dialogue brewed between thinkers, writers, and laborers under the smoky ceilings of Paris cafés. The Enlightenment's pulse beat strongest in those rooms, and no matter how many heads rolled, the ideals remained, because those ideals had been sipped and shared, brewed and burned into the memory of the people. If wine represented tradition and indulgence, coffee was clarity and rebellion. It was the drink of the new world, not of kings but of citizens. As empires fell and democracies rose, coffee remained, but its image changed. From a drink of the radical, it became a drink of routine. The same stimulant that once sparked rebellions now fuels office work. But the roots are still there, hidden beneath the foam. Every cup carries echoes of resistance, of nights when thinkers challenged empires, of mornings when peasants questioned priests. And though we drink it casually now, its past is anything but casual. If you trace the timelines of revolution, you will find a cafe. You will find a whisper. You will find a mind lit by caffeine and fury. And perhaps that is the reason coffee should be illegal. Not because it harms the body, but because it awakens the soul. And souls that awaken have a dangerous habit of reshaping the world around them. So when you take your next sip, ask yourself what you're really consuming. A drink or a legacy, because coffee's past is not a peaceful one. It is laced with rebellion brewed in every corner of the globe. Toppled thrones, it rewrote laws. It redefined what people could think, say, and believe. And though history may not label it a weapon, make no mistake, it was used like one. Quiet, invisible, effective. Coffee didn't just fuel revolutions. It enabled them. And once that bitter heat reached the brain, there was no turning back. That's why rulers feared it. That's why they tried to ban it. And that's why, if truth be told, it might just be too dangerous to be legal. Because it wasn't just the taste. It was the clarity. Chapter 2. The Church Versus. There was a time when sipping coffee could threaten your soul. Not in metaphor, but in doctrine. When the dark brew first crossed into Christian Europe, it didn't arrive as a curiosity. It arrived as a scandal. Imported from the Islamic world, coffee smelled foreign. Tasted foreign, it was foreign. Suspicion brewed alongside it. Priests whispered warnings. Monks frowned at steaming mugs. The drink had been born in lands not ruled by Christendom, and that alone made it suspect. In a world where religion explained everything, weather, illness, war, coffee's rise seemed unnatural. It didn't intoxicate like wine. It sharpened like steel. That made it harder to control. And control was everything. The church had spent centuries shaping thought. Now a beam threatened to undo it all. Not with heresy, but with clarity. People were staying up late, reading more, questioning deeper. And for some, that could only mean one thing. This drink, they said, was unholy. The panic didn't begin in cathedrals. It began in whispers. Parishioners murmured that the effects of coffee felt wrong. Not sinful like wine, but something else, something clever. Sin clouded the mind. This cleared it. And in a world ruled by obedience, clarity was dangerous. Bishops debated its effects in hushed councils. Was this bitter potion a tool of the divine, or something darker? In some cities, the fear was immediate. Coffee was linked to the East, to Islam, to unfamiliar prayers. If wine had been blessed in sacred rites, coffee had been stirred in infidel hands. The contrast was spiritual. One was the blood of Christ, the other the blood of rebellion, and the line between the two became increasingly blurry. Some clergy called it a Trojan horse. Others labeled it a satanic trick, not because it caused sin, but because it made people question sin's definition. That was the terror. A drink that inspired thought was more dangerous than one that inspired lust. As the church grew uneasy, the people grew curious. Coffee houses opened near churches. At first, they were tolerated, then feared. Priests noticed something strange. Fewer people came to evening mass. Confessions dropped. The faithful, once passive, began asking questions after sermons. Dangerous questions, the kind with no easy answers. Coffee houses became known as places of dissent. Not with torches and pitchforks, but with debate and reason. That terrified the clergy. Faith, they believed, should be swallowed whole. Coffee encouraged digestion. Each cup peeled back layers of blind belief. The church had built its power on ritual, repetition, and mystery. Coffee, with its clarity and stimulation, threatened to unravel that carefully constructed web. Soon, sermons began to denounce the drink openly. Some bishops even declared that the bean itself carried demonic influence. They said the devil used it to disguise arrogance as enlightenment. But beneath the fire and brimstone was a quieter truth. Coffee had become the church's rival, one sip at a time. Efforts to crush the drink grew desperate. Clergy demanded bans. Local governments passed laws. In some regions, owning a coffee pot could land you in court. Not for breaking civil law, but for offending God. Religious leaders claimed the drink encouraged moral decay. They said it replaced prayer with talk, replaced humility with opinion. In reality, what they feared wasn't sin, but thought. Coffee encouraged mental independence. It woke the poor. It emboldened the silent. And worst of all, it made people question divine authority. The church responded not with dialogue, but with suppression. Coffee houses were closed, roasters were arrested, patrons were threatened with excommunication. The faithful were told to choose loyalty to God or loyalty to the bean. But the crackdown only spread the drink further. In secrecy, people brewed. In whispers, they discussed. The aroma of rebellion now mingled with incense. Because once the mind awakens, no decree, not even one from heaven, can force it back to sleep. But the church was not a monolith. Some within its walls were tempted. Younger priests and scholars found the drink useful, kept them alert during late-night studies, to sharpen their thoughts during debates. Secretly they sipped, quietly they gathered, and eventually even high-ranking clergy began to rethink. Could the drink be baptized metaphorically? Could it serve the church rather than threaten it? A small faction argued that coffee's clarity could aid in understanding Scripture, that its mental stimulation was a gift, not a curse. But the old guard resisted. To them, this was the edge of a blade. Allow coffee and you invite questioning. Invite questioning, and you risk unraveling centuries of certainty. The compromise came too late. By the time some bishops tried to embrace the drink, the people had already moved on, forming their own spaces of thought outside sacred halls. The spiritual monopoly was cracked, and coffee had dealt the first blow. The real threat wasn't the drink. It was the shift in power. For centuries, the church had been the gatekeeper of knowledge. The Bible was in Latin. The sermons controlled, the questions limited. But coffee didn't ask permission. It created new venues for discussion. Cafés instead of pews, conversations instead of sermons. In those cafés, people discussed more than scripture. They dissected doctrine, criticized hierarchy, and imagined new forms of truth. Coffee didn't destroy faith, but it did democratize it, and that was the crime. No longer did one have to kneel to receive wisdom. One only needed a cup and an open mind. That shift reverberated through monasteries, pulpits, and councils. It wasn't just a drink being sipped, it was power being redistributed. Quietly, steadily, irreversibly, the church could outlaw brews, could burn beans, but it couldn't unthink what had been thought. And once the mind finds clarity, it does not easily forget the taste of freedom. In towns across Europe, religious riots began to feel different, less spontaneous, more intellectual. The pamphlets became sharper, the sermons more challenged. It wasn't that coffee created heresy. It simply made people confident enough to spot contradictions. The faithful began to read scripture on their own. Debates erupted, interpretations fractured, and with them so did unity. Reformation had begun long before coffee, but the drink accelerated it. It widened the cracks, made the split irreparable. Protestants embraced the brew as a symbol of defiance. Catholics remained divided, and somewhere in between, thinkers emerged who wanted no priest at all, just clarity, reason, and a quiet place to think. Coffee became their sacrament, their ritual of independence, their mental communion, not based on mystery but understanding, and that terrified institutions that thrived on obedience. The church wasn't just losing followers, it was losing believers, and that loss wasn't loud. It was quiet, steady, and brewed at a boiling point no pulpit could cool. Even art and literature began to reflect the shift. Paintings no longer glorified divine hierarchy. They captured scenes from cafés. Poems praised the spark of thought, not the humility of faith. The sacred and the secular had clashed before, but now coffee was the battleground. Not in violent war, but in cultural erosion. The drink had become a symbol of self-awareness, of waking up from centuries of ritual. It wasn't that people stopped believing in God. They simply stopped believing that only the church had access to him. That subtle rebellion, infused in every cup, was a revolution. The church, sensing the shift, tried to rebrand, tried to bring coffee into its own rituals. But it was too late. The bean had outpaced the bell, and in the shadow of every cathedral rose the scent of roasted defiance. Not shouted, not preached, just sipped, quietly, daily, irrevocably. Coffee had not been invented to challenge religion. But history doesn't care about intention, cares about impact, and the impact was undeniable. Where once people feared spiritual punishment for asking questions, now they asked freely. They read more, discussed more, challenged more. The drink gave them stamina to wrestle with dogma, to think beyond the pulpit, and the institutions built on silence began to shudder under the weight of endless thought. That is why coffee frightened the church. Not because it corrupted morals, but because it amplified minds. And minds, once amplified, rarely return to quiet compliance. The war between church and cup eventually faded, but the consequences remained. Coffee became mainstream, religion adapted, but something irreversible had occurred. The balance had shifted. Thought had moved out of the cathedral and into the cafe. Worship had become more personal, more introspective, more awake. Coffee didn't kill religion. It fractured its monopoly, and that fracture created space for science, for literature, for revolution. The bean had rewritten the script, and it had done so not with force, but with focus. A focus the church had once claimed as its own. So if we ask why coffee should be illegal, this might be one answer. Not because it causes sin, but because it ends unquestioned faith, because it replaces ritual with reason, and in a world built on obedience, that may be the greatest heresy of all. The church once tried to crush it for that reason. Perhaps deep down they weren't wrong. Perhaps coffee is dangerous, not to the body, but to the soul that refuses to stay silent. Chapter 3: Caffeine Wars and Colonial Blood. Long before coffee filled paper cups and trendy cafes, it spilled blood across continents. Its rise wasn't organic. It was forced, cultivated through chains, whips, and empire. When Europe tasted coffee and craved more, the supply had to be scaled and fast. But coffee doesn't grow in cold climates. It needs heat, humidity, labor, and colonialism provided all three. European powers looked south, to tropical lands already subdued, to people already shackled. They carved plantations into forests, turned jungles into caffeine factories, and enslaved millions to harvest the bean. Every sip was extracted through suffering. Coffee didn't spread because it was loved. It spread because it was profitable. Monarchs wanted taxes, merchants wanted margins. Plantations ran day and night. Slaves were worked to death. Their sweat soaked the soil where coffee thrived. This wasn't agriculture. It was conquest in slow motion. And as the brew traveled to drawing rooms and salons, no one tasted the pain. They only tasted the bitterness, not of beans, but of blood. In the Caribbean, coffee grew side by side with sugar, and both were fertilized with the same brutality. On islands like Haiti and Jamaica, enslaved Africans were forced to labor in unbearable heat, picking, drying, and roasting beans they would never taste. Overseers with whips patrolled fields. Escape meant death. Rest was a luxury. Life expectancy was short. The plantations weren't farms, they were prisons. But the profits were staggering. European demand soared. The more Europe awoke to coffee, the more the colonies drowned in it. Even when uprisings exploded, as in Haiti, the response was not reform but retaliation. Colonial powers doubled down. They replaced bodies with more bodies. Coffee's golden age was the blackest for those who harvested it. And though abolition would eventually come, the structures remained. Cheap labor, stolen land, exploited soil, this became the model. Coffee's cost has never just been economic. It has always been human, and the plantations built to serve it never fully disappeared. They only changed names. Brazil became the new heart of this machine. By the 19th century, it was the largest coffee producer in the world, and it achieved that status through mass enslavement. Even after other nations had begun to abolish slavery, Brazil clung to it, driven by coffee's insatiable demand. Over 1 million enslaved Africans were shipped there, torn from families and homelands to feed the European addiction. Plantations sprawled like kingdoms. Some held thousands of slaves, watched over by armed guards. Children were born into bondage. Generations passed without freedom. And all for the bean. Brazil's wealth grew. So did its ports, cities, and aristocracy. But beneath that luxury was agony. The international coffee trade relied on a simple equation. Someone must suffer so others could sip. Even after slavery was abolished in Brazil, indentured labor from Asia and Europe took its place. The names changed, the chains evolved, but the engine never stopped. The coffee kept coming, and the blood kept flowing. Ethiopia is often celebrated as coffee's birthplace, but even there, the bean became a source of division and exploitation. While rural farmers cultivated coffee for local use, colonial powers eyed Ethiopia with hunger. Though it was never fully colonized, it was pressured, coerced, and pulled into global markets on foreign terms. Farmers lost autonomy. Prices were dictated from abroad. And as demand grew, traditional farming gave way to larger operations serving foreign consumers. In time, Ethiopia's sacred drink, once used in rituals and community gatherings, became a commodity, one priced in London and consumed in Paris. The story repeated across Africa. Colonial administrators mapped land, relocated communities, and turned entire regions into coffee zones. Resistance was crushed, culture was rewritten. And though coffee originated here, the profit didn't stay. It was exported like the beans. What remained were empty fields, hungry workers, and nations trapped in dependence. Also, the West could stay awake a little longer. In Asia, the Dutch turned Indonesia into a caffeine colony. The island of Java became synonymous with coffee, but few know the cost. The Dutch East India Company introduced forced cultivation systems. Farmers were ordered to grow coffee instead of food. Those who resisted were punished. Hunger spread. Families starved so Europe could drink. Villages became plantations. culture became output, and the people, once independent, became workers for a company they never chose. It wasn't just theft of land. It was theft of purpose. Entire societies were reshaped to serve an appetite not their own. And this pattern was deliberate. The Dutch didn't just want beans, they wanted control. Every cup served in Amsterdam had a shadow stretching across the Pacific. And in that shadow lived a history erased. People displaced, a truth denied. Coffee's journey was not peaceful. It was built on forced obedience. And the plantations of Java stood as proof that the bean could conquer just as ruthlessly as any army. As the 20th century dawned, formal empires collapsed. But the caffeine machine adapted. Now, instead of monarchs, corporations ruled. Instead of armies, banks dictated terms. Countries that had once been colonized were now trapped in debt, forced to keep producing coffee to survive. The terms were brutal. Sell low, buy high. Grow coffee, not food. Stay poor, stay productive. Multinational companies built empires with glossy logos and smiling campaigns, but their roots ran through the same blood-soaked fields. Workers were paid pennies. Environmental damage worsened. Traditional farming knowledge was discarded for monoculture. The modern coffee supply chain became an invisible empire, one without borders. One that didn't need soldiers, just customers. And the Western world kept sipping. Cafés spread across cities. Culture revolved around caffeine. But the hands that picked the beans remained invisible. That invisibility is part of the system. If you never see the suffering, you never question the drink. And the profits keep flowing, like steam from a freshly poured cup. In Colombia, narco wars often overshadow the brutal legacy of coffee. But long before cocaine funded violence, it was coffee that shaped the nation's economy and its inequality. Vast estates controlled by elites profited massively, while poor farmers struggled with debt, land scarcity, and coercion. When global prices dropped, the impact wasn't felt in boardrooms. It was felt in villages. Coffee tied Colombia to the whims of Wall Street. And when workers protested, governments responded with force. The bean became political, a tool of both pride and oppression. Colombia marketed itself as the home of smooth, premium coffee. But the stories behind the cup were anything but smooth. Families displaced, forests cleared, water poisoned, all to meet quotas, all to satisfy foreign demand. It's easy to romanticize Colombian coffee, but to understand its true flavor, one must also taste the betrayal of land, of labor, of generations sacrificed to a global craving that never seems to end. Even fair trade, a concept meant to heal this legacy, has cracks. While some companies genuinely try to improve farmer conditions, many use fair trade as a marketing tool. The label looks good, the system less so. Farmers are still vulnerable to market swings. Middlemen still take the lion's share. Certifications cost money many small farmers don't have. And even when they meet the criteria, fair trade prices often remain just barely livable. It's a bandage on a broken system, a feel-good illusion for consumers, because fixing the real problem would mean confronting the root of coffee's success: exploitation. As long as profit margins depend on underpaid labor in faraway lands, the system remains what it has always been: a polite form of conquest, one dressed in recycled cups and cozy branding. But beneath the surface, it's the same story. Coffee grows, someone suffers, someone profits, and the world keeps turning, fueled by caffeine, fueled by silence. Today's coffee shops feel peaceful. Ambient music, smiling baristas, foam art. But behind that calm are centuries of conflict, centuries of extraction. That cup on your table carries the echoes of empires, the ghosts of plantations, the silence of the oppressed. And yet, most never think of it. That's the brilliance of the system. It hides its origins. It sanitizes the blood, makes oppression look artisanal. And so the cycle continues. Every sip is a memory forgotten. Every refill, a chapter erased. But the truth is still there, hidden in contracts, in supply chains, in scorched earth and broken communities. Coffee is not innocent. It has never been. It has simply been branded well. That's why history books mention trade, but not trauma. Plantations, but not pain. Profits, but not the price. And maybe that's the most dangerous part. A legacy this dark shouldn't be so easy to swallow. If coffee were invented today with its environmental damage, human exploitation, and history of conquest, it might never be legalized. Or at the very least, it would face scrutiny. But it wasn't invented today. It was inherited, normalized, woven into daily life so tightly we no longer question it. That's what makes it powerful and dangerous, not because of what it is, but because of what it hides. If you follow the supply chain far enough, you find broken lives. If you trace its past, you find colonial flags planted in stolen soil. Coffee is the global drink of comfort, but for millions it has never been comforting. It has been a cage, a whip, a chain, and that contradiction lingers in every cup. You can sweeten it, you can decorate it, but you can't erase it. The bitterness of coffee runs deeper than taste. It runs through history itself. So if anyone asks why coffee should be illegal, tell them this. Because it's built on stolen lives. Because it masked slavery with flavor. Because it grew from conquest and never fully stopped. The bean didn't just energize the world. It helped enslave it. Empires rose on its steam. Corporations fattened on its trade. And the people who made it possible were left in silence. Coffee's real legacy is not written in cookbooks. It's buried in unmarked graves, unpaid labor, and forgotten names. That's not just history. That's the present. And until we confront it, every cup is a continuation, a quiet agreement to forget. But the land remembers. The people remember, and deep down, so should we. Chapter 4. The mind hack no one voted for. There was a time when coffee meant rebellion, a symbol of free thought. But by the 20th century, it had mutated into something else entirely. No longer a drink of dissidence, it had become a tool of conformity. What began in dimly lit coffee houses, where thinkers whispered dangerous ideas, was now poured into factory thermoses and office mugs. The revolution had been hijacked. Caffeine was no longer the enemy of the system, it was the system. It wasn't used to question power anymore. It was used to serve it. Workers who once debated the world now stayed quiet and focused. Sleep was skipped, breaks were shortened, deadlines were met. And behind this shift was something few noticed. Coffee didn't just stimulate minds, it rewired expectations. It redefined productivity. And it made exhaustion seem like a personal failure, not a structural design. Somewhere along the way, The drink of the free had become the fuel of the machine, and the transformation had happened in silence. Governments noticed the change. Militaries were among the first to embrace caffeine, not as a luxury, but as a strategic weapon. Soldiers were given rations filled with instant coffee packets. Caffeine became as essential as bullets, not to soothe but to sustain. Armies needed alertness and coffee delivered, but it didn't stop at the battlefield. The wartime mentality followed men home. Factories picked up the model. Coffee breaks became institutionalized, not for relaxation, but for optimization. Productivity surged, and so did dependence. This wasn't an accident. It was policy. Civilian life had inherited military habits, and those habits were caffeinated. In government buildings, caffeine kept bureaucracies humming. In schools, it kept students pushing through fatigue. It seeped into every hour, every routine. Coffee was no longer an option, it was an expectation. To question it was to fall behind. And no one wanted to be the one who couldn't keep up. Corporations took the lead next. In shiny boardrooms and gray cubicles, coffee became an unofficial job requirement. Office culture wrapped itself around the coffee pot. It was there before meetings. During brainstorms, after lunch, it replaced water, it replaced rest. Sleep was treated like a flaw, fatigue like a weakness, but caffeine solved that. Temporarily. It didn't make workers healthier, just quieter, faster, more manageable. Executives didn't need to force long hours anymore. Caffeine made people volunteer for them. This was the brilliance of the shift. Control didn't need chains, it needed only a cup. Workers self-regulated. They believed exhaustion was their own fault, that they weren't strong enough, disciplined enough. Meanwhile, the real culprit sat in their mugs, disguising exhaustion as efficiency. No policy had mandated this. No vote had approved it. Yet here it was, entire industries running on a substance that numbed tired minds just enough to keep the wheels spinning. The mind hack had become routine, and no one noticed it had been installed. Advertising only made it worse. Coffee was no longer just a drink, it was a lifestyle. It was sexy, it was sophisticated, it was necessary. Commercials told people they weren't themselves without it. That morning grogginess wasn't a sign to rest, it was a cue to consume. Caffeine dependency was rebranded as morning charm. Fatigue was recast as a lack of flavor. The solution was always more coffee. But behind the glossy ads and catchy jingles was something darker. A slow erosion of consent. People didn't choose coffee anymore. They needed it, not because it tasted good, but because their schedules, their workloads, their entire existence demanded it. Coffee wasn't freeing them. It was holding them hostage, wrapped in pleasant rituals, hidden behind steaming cups, and no one stopped to ask, why do we need this so badly? Why is this the only way to function? The answer was uncomfortable, because society had been built around exhaustion, and caffeine was its patchwork fix. Even schools weren't spared. Teenagers, barely past childhood, downed coffee to survive endless exams and early classes. Sleep-deprived students became the norm. Cafeterias sold coffee. Vending machines dispensed it. Teachers encouraged it. The message was clear: don't rest, just recharge. Coffee turned the natural rhythms of the human body into a liability. Morning tiredness, fix it. Afternoon crash, Fight it, late-night anxiety, brew through it. And when the cycle broke, when the body rebelled, coffee was there to drag it back into line. This wasn't education anymore. It was preconditioning, training minds to function under pressure, to ignore signals, to suppress needs, to survive on fumes. By the time those students entered the workforce, the pattern was set. Caffeine was no longer a tool. It was a crutch. And the real tragedy? No one taught them how to live without it, because the system didn't want them rested. It wanted them alert, obedient, and just tired enough not to ask why. Over time, caffeine became invisible. It was everywhere, in sodas, in energy drinks, in pills. The line between food and stimulant disappeared. Sleep, once sacred, became negotiable. Hustle culture celebrated the grind. The all-nighter became a badge of honor. But this glorification hid a truth. Society had been engineered to extract more hours than humans could safely give. And coffee was the lubricant. It didn't increase energy, it borrowed it. From tomorrow, from health, from sanity. The consequences crept in slowly. Burnout, insomnia, anxiety. But these were blamed on the individual, not the system. People were told to try yoga, meditation, supplements, everything except rest, because rest would break the spell. Rest would make the system falter. And so the mugs stayed full, the eyes stayed open, and the debt to the body grew deeper, all while caffeine sat quietly in the bloodstream, rewriting the definition of normal one heartbeat at a time. This wasn't some shadowy conspiracy. It was worse. It was cultural evolution by exhaustion. No one needed to orchestrate it. The economy did the work. A tired population was a compliant one. A caffeinated one was even better, energized enough to function, but too wired to reflect. Coffee became the fuel for capitalist ambition. It erased the line between worker and machine. It blurred boundaries. Nights became extensions of days. Weekends bled into weekdays. Work became life, and caffeine kept it all stitched together. The mind hack wasn't in the coffee itself. It was in the need for it, in the way the world had been redesigned around its effects. A redesign no one voted for. No one debated, it just happened slowly, irrevocably, until even the rebels needed their cup to resist. Until even the critics stayed up late, writing, working, warning, powered by the very thing they feared. That's how deep the hook had sunk. And yet, despite the normalization, the cracks are showing. Mental health crises are rising. Sleep disorders are widespread. Focus is fleeting. The very stimulant meant to sharpen us is now numbing us, creating artificial highs, dragging us through artificial days. The burnout epidemic isn't accidental. It's systemic. Caffeine can't fix that, can only hide it for a while. And then the body demands repayment. The brain rebels, the illusion fades. But instead of changing course, we double down. Stronger brews, more doses, faster delivery. The system doesn't want healing. It wants maintenance. And coffee is the maintenance drug of choice. It doesn't challenge the schedule. It enables it. Doesn't fix the fatigue. It silences it. The scariest part isn't the addiction. It's the illusion of freedom. The belief that we're choosing to run ourselves into the ground, one cup at a time. But when the need is manufactured, is it really a choice? In modern workplaces, sleep is an enemy. Breaks are indulgences. The badge of honor goes to the most exhausted, not the most efficient. Coffee plays the role of enabler, props up the failing system, lets managers demand more, lets workers expect less. It gives just enough energy to survive, but never enough to question. The cycle is elegant, diabolical, and completely normalized. Even labor movements haven't fully escaped it. Coffee fuels the fight, but also the fatigue. It's in every meeting, every march, every manifesto. It gives fire, but steals rest. Gives voice, but steals calm. The drink of rebellion has been absorbed into the very system it once defied. And in doing so, it became its own kind of oppressor. One that asks for nothing but takes everything. Quietly, legally, every day. And no one notices because everyone is tired. Everyone is focused, everyone is wired. And no one is stopping long enough to ask, what if we didn't need it? What if caffeine dependence isn't a flaw in the system, but a feature? What if it's the glue that holds a broken world together, keeping us just energized enough to function, but too drained to revolt? This is the mind hack, not in the bean, but in the world the bean built. A world where rest is rebellion, where alertness is leased, not earned, where the average person wakes up not with joy, but with desperation. A need to chase clarity they no longer remember feeling naturally, and so they reach for the mug, again and again, not to start the day but to survive it. That's not freedom, that's dependency, that's conditioning. And no one consented to it. It just happened slowly, gradually, until needing coffee wasn't a personal quirk, it was a civic expectation. The mind hack no one noticed, the leash no one questioned, the system no one escaped, until now. So if someone asks why coffee should be illegal, tell them this. Because it rewired our society without permission. Because it turned exhaustion into a virtue. Because it hijacked rebellion and rebranded it as routine. And because the greatest tricks aren't the ones we resist. They're the ones we welcome. Warm, comforting, sipped slowly, every morning, with a smile. Chapter 5. Addiction by design. Most people think they drink coffee by choice. They believe it's a ritual, a preference, a harmless daily habit. But what if that habit was engineered? What if the craving wasn't natural but installed? Coffee isn't just addictive, it was made to be. Roasting methods, caffeine concentration, flavor profiles, none of it is accidental. Every step has been optimized to ensure you come back. Modern coffee isn't the earthy brew once sipped in Ethiopian ceremonies. It's a hyper-processed, precision-engineered stimulant, brewed to bypass willpower, marketed to hijack identity. This isn't about enjoying a cup. It's about programming a need. The deeper you go, the harder it is to escape. Not because you love it, but because your brain now depends on it. And like any system designed for profit, your dependence is the product. Every jitter, every crash, every refill, it's all part of the design. You're not drinking it because it's harmless. You're drinking it because they made sure you would. Caffeine itself is a powerful drug. It doesn't just wake you up, it rewires your neurochemistry. It blocks adenosine, the chemical that tells your brain it's tired. And while that sounds helpful, it's a trick. You're still exhausted. You just can't feel it. Your body doesn't rest. It just powers through. And the more you do it, the more your body adjusts. Tolerance builds. The same cup no longer works. So you drink more, then more, until the line between functioning and needing disappears. You aren't alert, you're just avoiding withdrawal. And that's the trap. The symptoms of withdrawal, headaches, mood swings, fogginess, start within hours of missing a dose. Not days, hours. This isn't a coincidence. This chemical dependency, legal, celebrated, profitable, but real. And every major coffee chain knows it. Their product isn't just liquid energy. It's an addiction loop, a self-sustaining cycle. And once you're in it, breaking out feels like breaking yourself. But the addiction isn't just biological. It's cultural. Coffee is everywhere. In advertising, in fashion, in memes, in social rituals. It's branded as success, intelligence, ambition. Holding a cup signals sophistication. Skipping it makes you look lazy. From sitcoms to office desks, the message is constant. Everyone drinks it. And if you don't, you're an outsider. This normalization is part of the trap. It turns a chemical dependency into a lifestyle. People joke about needing coffee to survive, but the joke hides a truth. If caffeine had arrived today as a new drug with its side effects, withdrawal symptoms, and dependency risks, it might be banned, or at least regulated. But because it's familiar, it escapes scrutiny. And that's the danger. The addiction has been aestheticized, romanticized, even weaponized. So now, quitting isn't just hard on your body, it's hard on your identity. You're not just walking away from a drink. You're walking away from who society told you to be. Even the brewing process is designed to reinforce dependency. Dark roasts, for example, don't contain more caffeine, but they taste stronger, more bitter, more aggressive. That punch you feel isn't potency. It's perception. Coffee companies use bitterness to signal strength, creating a psychological link between taste and effectiveness. It's not just flavor, it's messaging. You're taught that if it doesn't hit hard, it's not working. So you seek out the most intense version. Espresso shots, cold brews, double roasts, your palate adjusts, your brain follows. Before long, weak coffee feels useless, and regular energy feels unnatural. You're no longer chasing alertness. You're running from the crash, because the crash always comes. Caffeine's high is brief, but the low drags, and the only cure, you're told, is another cup. The loop is closed. You're trapped inside it. And every upgrade in brew strength, every trendy new blend, isn't innovation, it's escalation. An arms race against your own biology. Withdrawal is rarely discussed outside of jokes, but it's very real. Miss one morning cup and the symptoms begin. A dull ache behind your eyes, a fog rolling over your thoughts, irritability, fatigue, and an overwhelming sense that something is wrong. You're not sick, you're not dying, you're detoxing. And most people never get far enough to finish the process. They give in by lunch. The headache is too sharp. The world feels too slow. So they pour another cup. Just one. But it resets the loop. Your body never learns to function without caffeine because you never let it. This isn't mild dependence. It's classic addiction behavior. The fear of stopping. The pain of abstaining, the compulsion to resume, and it's packaged with smiles and foam art, wrapped in cozy cups and cafe charm. But strip away the aesthetics, and what's left is raw dependency, engineered, encouraged, and exploited for generations. Even decaf isn't safe. Most decaffeinated coffees still contain small amounts of caffeine, enough to trigger mild responses in sensitive drinkers. And for some, that's all it takes to restart the cycle. The craving isn't just for energy. It's for ritual, for comfort, for the dopamine hit tied to every step, grinding, brewing, sipping. The experience is as addictive as the chemical. And coffee companies know this. That's why they don't just sell beans. They sell identities, the intellectual, the hustler, the wanderer, the minimalist, the gourmet. Pick a brand, and you'll find a persona attached. It's not just coffee, it's who you are. This branding deepens dependency. It fuses addiction with self-image. And when you try to quit, it feels like losing a part of yourself. That's not normal, that's not healthy, that's not choice. It's manipulation in its most elegant form. And like all good manipulation, it wears the mask of freedom. Science has shown that caffeine affects the same brain pathways as cocaine, albeit in milder form. It stimulates the release of dopamine, the brain's pleasure chemical. This is what makes you feel good, what makes you crave more. But over time, your brain adapts, produces less dopamine naturally, so you rely on caffeine to feel normal. Without it, joy becomes muted, focus fades, life feels heavy. Not because it is, but because your brain has been recalibrated. Caffeine hasn't made you superhuman. It's made you dependent. And this rewiring doesn't just affect mornings. It affects moods, sleep, relationships, performance. You don't notice the damage because it's slow, but it compounds. Until one day you realize you haven't felt true rest in years. You've been running on borrowed energy, and every day begins with a loan you can't stop taking. This is addiction not by accident but by design. And yet society applauds it. Coffee is considered safer than alcohol, more respectable than nicotine, more normal than anything prescribed. It hides in plain sight, protected by culture, worshipped by marketing. But legality does not equal safety, and normalization does not erase consequences. The addiction persists, quiet, ubiquitous, profitable. That's the brilliance of the system. It makes you believe you're not addicted, just tired, just busy, just a coffee person. But underneath those labels is the same truth. You're hooked, millions are, and the industries that profit from it have no incentive to change. Why would they? The customers keep coming, the symptoms keep returning, and the world keeps spinning, powered by caffeine highs and withdrawal lows. It's a perfect business model. Turns exhaustion into currency, and your body into an ATM. Try quitting and you'll see just how deep the roots go. The first few days are brutal. Your brain resists, your body aches. Every instinct tells you to go back. Just one cup, just one fix. And when you resist, the world seems slower, duller, colder. That's not reality. That's the withdrawal speaking. But it feels real. And for most people, it's too much. So they return, grateful, relieved, trapped. That's the final stroke of brilliance. The addiction defends itself, punishes escape attempts, and disguises submission as choice. So people stop trying. They make peace with dependency, and they tell themselves it's just a harmless habit. But that's the tragedy, because nothing about this system is harmless. Preys on biology, weaponizes culture, and profits from silence. That's not an accident. That's the blueprint. Even health experts sometimes fail to recognize the scale of this addiction. They discuss caffeine like a mild stimulant, something you should monitor but not fear. But they miss the bigger picture. This isn't about one chemical. It's about a system. A machine that stretches across continents, across cultures, across generations. A machine that cultivates dependency, markets it as lifestyle, and silences those who question it. This isn't conspiracy, it's capitalism. Addiction isn't a side effect, it's the goal. Because addicted people are reliable customers. Predictable, profitable, and disposable. The supply chain of caffeine isn't just physical, it's psychological. It runs through brains, through rituals, through the quiet panic of a morning without coffee. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The addiction is everywhere, and it was never yours. It was given to you. So if someone asks why coffee should be illegal, tell them this. Because it's the most successful addiction ever marketed as a lifestyle. Because it rewired our brains for profit. Because it stole sleep, energy, and joy and sold them back in cups. Coffee is not just a drink. It's a system. And addiction is its foundation. Not a bug, a feature, engineered, perfected, and sold to us with a smile. Chapter 6: Black Markets and Bitter Secrets. In the shadows of history, coffee has always had a double life. Publicly adored, secretly feared. Worshipped by the masses but policed by rulers. Across centuries and continents, bans were declared, punishments handed out, entire cities raided. Not for weapons, gold, or drugs, but for beans. Coffee beans. The most ordinary substance in the modern world was once a symbol of disorder. A drink so dangerous that leaders believed outlawing it would save empires. But coffee never obeyed. Where it was banned, it went underground. Where it was taxed, it was smuggled. Where it was restricted, it spread faster. It became a currency of rebellion. A forbidden stimulant passed from hand to hand in whispers and risk. This wasn't just a drink anymore. It was contraband. And those who needed it, the thinkers, the workers, the restless, were willing to risk everything for a single cup. Because once society tasted coffee's power, it could never truly forget it. Centuries ago, Mecca banned coffee. The sacred city, heart of Islam, saw in coffee houses a rising threat. They weren't places of worship. They were spaces of conversation, debate, questioning. They rivaled mosques in attendance. Rulers feared that the unity found in those smoky corners would ferment resistance. So they cracked down. Beans were burned in the streets. Brews were outlawed, drinkers were punished. But still the cups clinked in silence behind locked doors. The ban failed, just like it failed in Cairo, where coffee had been declared sinful, or in Constantinople, where sultan after sultan tried to destroy the bean with royal decrees. And yet, every time the law cracked down, the people pushed back harder. Coffee proved something terrifying to those in charge. It could not be unlearned. Once tasted, once shared, it ignited a need not even fear could silence. Prohibition only made it stronger. And with each ban, the underground grew. Fast forward to Europe, where taxation became a weapon. Coffee wasn't outlawed outright, but it was made nearly unreachable. The English crown, like others, realized it could not stop coffee's spread. So instead, it strangled access. Licenses were required, fees were raised. Certain groups were banned from selling or brewing. In France, permits were needed to operate cafés. In Germany, rulers imposed monopolies. But wherever there were rules, there were those who broke them. Underground roasters, smuggling rings, and secret cafés emerged. Just like illicit taverns, these black market dens thrived in back alleys and basements. They became places where truth spilled faster than the brew, places where censorship failed. You couldn't stop the talk if you couldn't stop the coffee. And so the law became a game, a facade. Officials drank the same drink they banned. Taxes only bred corruption. Enforcement only bred rebellion. Coffee slipped through the cracks, one outlawed sip at a time. Even in colonial outposts, coffee's journey was paved with smuggling. European empires tried to control its cultivation, hoarding the bean like treasure. The Dutch guarded their Javanese plantations. The French protected their Caribbean ones. And the Arab world kept its original coffee trees under strict surveillance. But borders meant nothing to obsession. Seeds were stolen. Plants were smuggled in hollow canes, hidden in hems, passed from spy to spy. The bean became a secret weapon, its value equal to silver, its trade routes as protected as gold. Rival powers bribed, raided, and plotted to get their hands on it. Coffee was no longer a drink. It was economic warfare. An underground network of growers, traders, and transporters formed, driven not just by profit but by power. Where there was coffee, there was leverage. And those who controlled it didn't just rule breakfast. They ruled futures, fortunes, and fates. The bean had become a geopolitical device. The 20th century brought new laws, new regimes, and new bans. But the story didn't change. In Nazi-occupied Europe, coffee became scarce. Governments replaced it with grain-based substitutes. But real coffee, it vanished. Or so they thought. In basements and bunkers, resistance fighters brewed what little they could smuggle. Coffee became an act of defiance, a way to remember normal life. In Stalin's USSR, coffee was nearly unobtainable. Tea was promoted as the patriotic drink, while coffee was painted as a Western luxury. But in secret, Soviet black markets exploded. Smugglers brought it in from Turkey and the Balkans. Café culture flickered in quiet corners of Moscow. And anyone with access to the real stuff, diplomats, soldiers, traders, became part of a hidden economy. Coffee was rationed, hidden, whispered about, but never gone. It always found a way in, because the craving wasn't just for caffeine. It was for what coffee symbolized: freedom, curiosity, and choice. Even today, in the 21st century, some countries still ban or heavily restrict coffee. In North Korea, for example, coffee is largely prohibited for the general public. Only elites and foreign diplomats can access it. The average citizen doesn't even know what it tastes like. And yet, smuggled beans still make their way across borders. Chinese traders, defectors, underground dealers, they carry the brew that official policy says must not exist. This isn't just about beans. It's about access, privilege, and power. Because where coffee flows freely, ideas do too. That's why authoritarian states fear it. That's why they regulate it. Control the bean and you control the buzz. Limit the buzz and you limit the thinking. In these regimes, coffee isn't just contraband, it's a threat. A signal that someone, somewhere, is thinking too clearly, staying up too late, and asking the wrong questions. And that is exactly why the underground keeps growing. The black market for coffee has evolved. It's not just about legality anymore. It's about dodging corporate control. Across the globe, small farmers are bypassing international coffee conglomerates to sell directly to consumers. Because the traditional system exploits them. The price of beans is manipulated. Middlemen profit while growers starve. So farmers rebel. They roast their own, build underground networks, partner with rebels, activists, and digital platforms. In places like Ethiopia, Colombia, and Vietnam, these movements operate in legal gray zones, trading in defiance of trade rules set by billion-dollar empires. This is a new kind of coffee underground, one fueled not by criminality, but by justice. These farmers are reclaiming their legacy, challenging the same powers that once colonized their soil. For them, every cup sold outside the system is a protest, a quiet revolution, and the industry knows it. That's why they're trying to buy it all back, before the rebellion spills too far. Not all underground coffee is noble. In war zones and collapsed economies, coffee often becomes currency. In Venezuela, hyperinflation made cash useless. Coffee beans held more value. In Somalia, coffee trade routes became battlegrounds. In Syria, rebel groups taxed beans smuggled in from Turkey to fund operations. In these places, coffee isn't about comfort, it's about survival. It buys favor, it bribes officials, it feeds families. But it also empowers militias, fuels corruption, and funds violence. That's the dark side of the bean. When regulation collapses and desperation rises, coffee becomes a weapon. It moves in duffel bags and backpacks, across minefields and checkpoints. It brews in tin pots beside rifles. In these moments, coffee becomes more than a stimulant. It becomes a mirror of chaos, of what happens when something so ordinary becomes so essential that people will fight, kill, and die for it. This is not exaggeration. This is the bitter truth. Then there's the cafe underground. In countries where expression is tightly monitored, some cafés become shelters of thought. In Iran, unregistered coffee houses serve as meeting spots for dissidents. In China, unofficial cafés share banned books and encrypted Wi-Fi. In Saudi Arabia, women gather in quiet cafés to speak freely in ways the public sphere does not allow. These spaces live on the edge of legality. They open and close quietly. They whisper, not shout. But in their silence, they breathe life into resistance. The espresso machine becomes a siren, the barista a gatekeeper, the table a battlefield of ideas. Governments raid them, shut them down, arrest their owners. But they always return, because the need to connect, to think, to share, that doesn't die. And coffee, somehow, has become the lubricant of that defiance. These are not Starbucks clones. They are sanctuaries, and they are growing, across borders, across languages. One secret cafe at a time. Caffeine crimes have even reached the level of international espionage. In the Cold War, coffee shipments were used as fronts for intelligence operations. Beans hid documents. Cafés served as drop sites. Even diplomats smuggled exotic roasts under immunity protections, flavors unavailable behind the Iron Curtain. In more recent years, coffee companies themselves have been accused of manipulating import, export records to avoid tariffs or hide illegal labor practices. Investigations reveal forged paperwork, false origin claims, and laundering through shell farms. And while corporations deny wrongdoing, the trails tell another story. Coffee is big business, and where there's big business, there's deception. The modern coffee empire stands on shaky moral ground, its foundation built on secrecy, smuggling, and silence. What's in your cup may have crossed borders illegally, passed through child labor fields, or slipped into your country with falsified documents. The bean is never just a bean. It's a code, a cover, a currency of control. When something is banned repeatedly but never disappears, it reveals something deeper, a truth that cannot be outlawed. Coffee is not just a drink, it's a force. Every attempt to crush it has birthed a new resistance. Every border it crosses makes it harder to contain. And every hand that holds a cup is part of a silent network, one that governments, corporations, and empires have never fully controlled. The black market didn't make coffee dangerous. The danger was always there, in its ability to awaken, to empower, to unify. That is what makes coffee unstoppable. And that is why, no matter how many times the world has tried to ban it, the bean keeps boiling back to the surface, stronger, hotter, and more defiant than ever. So the next time you sip your brew, ask yourself, who had to hide for this to reach you? Who smuggled it, grew it, risked for it? What whispers traveled in that steam? Because behind every legal cup is a shadow network. And the only reason you can drink it freely today is because someone else didn't. Chapter 7. The Final Revelation. You thought it was just a drink, a morning ritual, a warm cup in cold hands. But that cup has changed. It no longer exists only in the kitchen or cafe. It has followed you into the digital age, disguised, invisible, and quietly watching. That steaming latte is now connected. The app you used to order it remembers everything. Where you bought it, when, what kind, how much sugar, what size. Your preferences are data, and your data is currency. Every tap, every swipe, every coffee loyalty point is being recorded, packaged, and sold. Your caffeine craving has become a fingerprint, a behavior map. You are being studied not by spies, but by algorithms. Your coffee habit is no longer private. It's a signal, a pattern, a vulnerability. And behind the aroma, there's a system, not one that keeps you awake, but one that keeps you exposed. Because surveillance today doesn't need cameras. It just needs caffeine. It began innocently enough. Coffee chains introduced loyalty cards. Scan here, get points. Buy 10, get 1 free. But that little barcode became a portal. Every scan was tracked. Every visit logged. Over time, they knew more than your favorite blend. They knew your schedule, your location patterns, whether you were a morning commuter or a late-night browser. And it didn't stop there. Apps FOFET. They began collecting payment histories, GPS data, even microphone access for voice commands. You allowed it all. Buried in the terms and conditions were permissions you never read, never questioned. You just wanted your coffee, and in doing so, you handed over the keys to your daily life. Because the modern cafe isn't just a place to drink. It's a surveillance terminal, a sensor-rich environment that knows you better than you know yourself. And the worst part? You never saw it coming. You never thought to ask what it cost. Some coffee machines are no longer dumb. They are smart, internet-connected, synced with your phone, your watch, even your home assistant. They learn your routines, know when you wake up, know when you skip a cup, know when you're anxious, when you're tired, when you're late. These machines report back. They update their software. They push notifications. And sometimes they share your data, quietly, legally. You gave them permission when you clicked accept. The very device you depend on to feel in control is now part of a wider network of control. This isn't fiction, it's happening now. Your coffee maker isn't spying on you because it hates you. It's doing it because it was designed that way, to serve not just you, but the companies that built it, the advertisers that fund it, and the analysts who monitor its data. You've been upgraded, and so has your brew. Welcome to the age of caffeinated surveillance. And then came the biometric vending machines, the ones in airports, universities, and tech campuses. They no longer ask for coins. They scan your face, your fingerprints, your iris. They identify you without a word. And in return, you get your caffeine fix in seconds. But at what price? These machines store your biometric data. Combine it with your purchase history. Build a profile that follows you. A profile that is hard to delete, harder to hide. The coffee isn't free, and neither is your identity. Governments see the benefit. Employers too. A fast, traceable, customized caffeine solution that doubles as a tool for behavioral monitoring. Who's on time, who's late, who's over-caffeinating, who's burning out. Every cup you take becomes part of your productivity file. In some offices, these machines even track how long you spend near them. Coffee has become a way to measure discipline, mood, and loyalty, one scan at a time. But it didn't stop with machines. Coffee culture itself was weaponized. Look around. The cafe is no longer just a cafe. It's a workspace, a meeting zone, a Wi-Fi hub. People come, sit, and stay. They open their laptops. They connect to networks. They reveal their schedules. Cafés began tracking devices through Wi-Fi. Some installed facial recognition cameras. Others sold customer behavior data to third-party firms. And the customer, always too distracted to notice, because coffee is a drug, and the drugged are easier to track. Caffeine sharpens the mind, yes, but it also binds the body to routine. And when you bind a population to routine, you can map them, predict them, influence them. This isn't paranoia, this is business. Coffee houses once sparked revolutions. Now they quietly feed the machines of predictive surveillance. The very spaces that once birthed dissent are now harvesters of compliance. All under the warm, familiar smell of roasted beans. The most chilling part? It was never forced. No one made you do this. You opted in willingly, gleefully. Coffee made it easy. It gave you rewards, convenience, stimulation. It made you feel awake, empowered. But behind that illusion was a bargain. You gave your data, your preferences, your time, and they gave you a sense of control while taking it from you. You became the product. Not your money, not your attention, your patterns, your impulses, your fatigue. Your need for stimulation was documented, quantified, sold. Coffee didn't enslave you through law. It did it through lifestyle, through branding, through the soft push of routine. And now it's embedded, not just in your day, but in your digital footprint, in your behavioral profile, in your predictive model. You are not just tracked, you are forecasted. Your next cup is already predicted, and that means your next move is too. Coffee is the perfect Trojan horse. It bypassed every defense. It slipped past suspicion. It was never scary, never invasive. It was cozy, comforting, human. No one feared a cafe. No one questioned a loyalty app. But now, that very harmlessness is what made it so powerful. It spread faster than any spyware, burrowed deeper than any virus. It made its way into every home, every phone, every wrist. Because the best surveillance doesn't feel like surveillance. Feels like service, like reward, like routine. And that's why coffee is so dangerous. It's not just about caffeine anymore. It's about behavioral engineering disguised as consumer pleasure. It's about data extraction disguised as convenience. The cup you love is the mask they wear. And every time you lift it, you're toasting the machine that watches you. The corporations that sell coffee aren't just beverage companies anymore. They're tech companies, data companies, behavioral scientists. They don't just want your dollars. They want your rhythms, your dopamine spikes, your fatigue cycles. And they've hired neuroscientists to perfect it, marketing experts to shape your cravings, app developers to track your clicks. They've built ecosystems around you. From the smell of the store to the buzz of the brew, every detail is engineered, not just to sell but to shape, to condition. They don't want one sale. They want lifetime loyalty, behavioral loyalty, predictive loyalty, and it's working. You've become part of a loop. Stimulus, reward, feedback, repeat. And the loop feeds them more than profits. It feeds them precision, insight, control. You've been mapped, not just by what you buy, but when you crave. Coffee is the bait, but what they really wanted was you. Some governments are starting to see the potential, not just for commerce, but for control. National ID programs are being tied to smart vending networks. Facial recognition cafés are spreading in urban surveillance zones. Caffeine becomes the entry point to deeper databases. What was once a coffee break becomes a checkpoint, a biometric update, a surveillance node. Authoritarian regimes love it. Democratic societies ignore it. But the result is the same: coffee as infrastructure, as behavioral scaffolding, as digital passport. You show up for a drink and leave with your information processed, cataloged, stored. In some countries, refusing to register for the coffee app bars you from public Wi-Fi. In others, your caffeine purchases affect your credit profile. The line between coffee shop and surveillance state is blurring. And no one is ringing the alarm, because the alarm sounds like a milk frother and smells like vanilla syrup. Even protests have been compromised. In some cities, cafe cameras were used to identify activists. Loyalty card records were subpoenaed to trace locations. Encrypted devices were flagged by network pings at coffee shop hotspots. The very spaces once used to organize resistance are now tools of repression. And coffee remains at the center, still innocent, still comforting, still deceptive. It is the perfect mask for power, the perfect cover for control, the perfect excuse for constant monitoring. And that's why no one banned it, because it works too well. Not just as a stimulant, but as a system that no one questions, a system that feels like freedom while delivering obedience. You don't have to silence a population when you can track, predict, and guide them with a drink. That's the final twist. The real reason coffee should be illegal, because it's no longer just a drink. It's the leash you never see. And now you've reached the end, the final revelation. You started this journey wondering how coffee could ever be considered dangerous. But now you've seen the truth, the revolutions it fueled, the empires it built, the minds it hacked, the addictions it created, the secrets it buried, the data it harvested. And in this last chapter, the quiet horror unfolds. Coffee didn't just change the world. It learned how to control it. through culture, through convenience, through code. It made us faster, weaker, more dependent, and easier to predict. The drink we thought made us free might be the very thing that took our freedom away. So the next time you hold that warm cup in your hands, ask yourself, who's really holding who?